There's a lot of movies about the Mafia and mobsters, but what is life really like inside the Mafia? What really goes on behind closed doors? How much money do they actually make, and how much of it gets confiscated by the government? Is there anything left for their families after all the fines are paid? What about the wives and children of mobsters? What kind of lives do they live? How much danger are they in? And who would you call if you were attacked by one of them? 911 or 555? LA Cosa Nostra? Stick around to find out the truth about the Mafia and what it is really like to be part of the family. We all start with what may seem like the most obvious question. Where does the Mafia even get all of that money? As anyone who has watched The Godfather knows, the Mafia's favorite way of making money is protection racketeering. They protect people from getting hurt, and in exchange, they get a small share of the business profits. Obviously, this isn't quite as simple as it sounds. If someone says they will pay the Mafia to protect their store and then doesn't pay them, they won't just get a warning. Instead, they might end up in the hospital without their kneecaps. In order to avoid this fate, most businesses pay the Mafia whether they want to or not. Of course, these payments aren't tax deductible. So if a businessman claims he paid $5,000 to a local mobster, the IRS would probably get very interested. To get around this, mobsters usually issue invoices from fake businesses that don't really exist. For example, if the mobster is Salvi the Shoe, he might send an invoice from Shoe Repair Inc. This way, the payment can be written off as a business expense. But how much do they actually make? According to the FBI, the 5 Mafia families based in New York alone pull in over $6 billion every year. That's almost double the GDP of Lithuania. In fact, according to Forbes, La Cosa Nostra would rank as the 374th largest company in the world. Between 2005 and 2008, they were even bigger, earning as much as $10 billion per year. It's not just the families that make a lot of money. Individual mobsters can earn hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. That's why when Anthony Gaspar Casso got arrested, he had a hard time understanding why his lawyer wasn't treating him better. He was used to being able to buy anything he wanted, including the $35,000 alligator skin shoes. The thing is, though, most of the Mafia's income isn't legal, which means that the government wants it. When mobsters get arrested, the government tries to confiscate as much of their illegal earnings as possible. To do this, they have special courts called asset forfeiture courts. These courts allow the government to take assets that were bought with illegal money. Even if the person isn't convicted of a crime, this means that sometimes mobsters have to fight to keep their own money. An example of this happened in 1985 when the government tried to take over a restaurant called the Rusty Anchor in Massachusetts. The place was owned by Gennaro Skinny Angelo. Skinny was a mobster, and he had made a lot of money selling drugs at the restaurant. The government didn't care that Skinny had actually built the restaurant legally with his own money. They just knew that he used it to sell drugs, and that was enough, so they tried to take it away from him. Skinny fought back and claimed that he was innocent. He said that he only ever sold meatballs and pasta at the restaurant and never did any drugs. After years of fighting, the Supreme Court sided with the government. Skinny lost the restaurant and had to watch it be demolished. It's not just restaurants that the government takes. Sometimes they go after mobster mansions. In 2005, the government took Vincent Chin Gigante's mansion because they believed he used it to launder money. They tried to split it up into 12 apartments so they could sell it to regular people. But those plans fell through. To this day, the government still owns the mansion and rents it out to a golf simulator company. So if you're thinking about robbing a mobster's house, maybe skip the mansions. They don't belong to the mobsters anymore. Instead, try robbing their safe deposit boxes at the bank. I know that sounds boring and unmobster-like, but it works. In 2018, the Fed stole $300 million from various mobsters' safe deposit boxes. They weren't even looking for that much. They just went to the boxes and took whatever they found. In some cases, they even took mobsters' wedding rings. So if you're going to rob a mobster, go for the flashy stuff. Don't bother with the cash in the bank. What happens to the money that isn't taken by the government? The answer is nothing. If a mobster gets arrested, the money just keeps circulating in the criminal underworld. Since no one can claim it, it usually just ends up back in the hands of other mobsters. In 2014, authorities found a storage unit that belonged to the Genovese crime family. Inside, they found $20 million in cash, along with jewelry and other valuables worth another $12 million. Who had rented the safety deposit box? No one claimed it. There were no names on it. The FBI thinks that it was being used as a stash spot for the entire New England crime family. So when the government isn't taking their money, mobsters just hide it or bury it. Just kidding, they don't bury it. Turns out that's a myth. People think mobsters bury their money because of movies like The Untouchables, but there's never been a case of a mobster burying treasure. Maybe they do it, but we just haven't found any evidence yet. Where does that leave mobster families? Are they left penniless after the government is done with them? Surprisingly, yes. When a mobster is arrested, the government confiscates everything they have, not just their illegal earnings. This means that their families are often left with nothing. Imagine being the wife of a mobster who thought he was going to retire early and leave his fortune to you. Instead, the government takes all his money and puts you in a bad financial situation. That's what happened to Teresa Gambino. She was the widow of mobster Paul Castellano, and she spent her days living in luxury. But when her husband got arrested, the government took all of his money, and she had to file for divorce. Suddenly, she went from living in a 17-room mansion to renting a 3-bedroom apartment. She also went from having a staff of 22 to having none. This meant that she had to cook her own meals and clean her own house. Luckily for her, she had some savings so she didn't have to work. But she did have to move in with her son. Before the divorce, she could have afforded to hire a maid or cook, but now she couldn't. Being married to a mobster is dangerous, but being related to one is even more dangerous. You see, mobsters don't just kill people they don't like. They also kill people that are close to them. Why? Because loyalty is everything in the Mafia. If you're related to a mobster, you have blood ties that should bind you together. If you're not loyal to your family, then you're a rat, and rats are killed. One example of this happened in 1979 when a hitman named Michael Franzese shot John Gotti's brother because Gotti had testified against Franzese in court. This is just one example of how dangerous being related to a mobster can be. Now, who would you call if you were attacked by a mobster? Would you call 911 or 555 LA Cosa Nostra? Well, the answer depends on what kind of injuries you have. If you have bullet wounds, then definitely call 911. Mobsters aren't doctors, and they won't help you. But if you have something less serious, like a broken nose, then you have options. You could call 911 and risk getting ratted out by one of the mobsters at the hospital. Or you could call La Cosa Nostra and hope that they'll fix things quietly. This is exactly what happened in 1990, when a group of mobsters beat up a cop. Instead of calling 911, the police commissioner called the Bonanno crime family to complain. A few weeks later, the mobsters responsible were summoned to a meeting with the police commissioner and the chief of detectives. There they were told to stop harassing cops or else. The message was clear. If the cops needed help, they didn't need to call 911. They just needed to call the mob. If you want to learn more about the Mafia, stay tuned for more videos.